Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Donne Rolfes. I'm one of the worship associates and part of the team that is working to bring this service to you. Whether you are in person or joining us remotely, I'm so glad you're here today. Unitarian Universalism is a non-creedal faith. We are a community bound together by shared values rather than a uniform set of beliefs. To help me express this, I'm using the words of Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, who says it very well in the Unitarian Universalist Pocket Guide. That's what you got when you became a member, that little pocket guide. We are people of all ages, coming from many backgrounds and holding many beliefs. Our faith does not guarantee that everything will be all right if we live by a certain set of rules. Instead, the hope and courage we receive from worship, religious education, community, and social justice efforts call us out of self-centeredness and fear to a larger commitment beyond ourselves. These are defining times. The challenges before us as individuals and as members of local, national, and global communities are quite literally matters of life and death, especially for Black and Brown people, immigrants, refugees, LGBTQ folk, people with disabilities, and those deprived of the material resources needed to survive and thrive. Powerful social forces imperil our sense of hope and threaten the bonds of interdependence that bind us all. At its best, Unitarian Universalism teaches us that the humanity of every single person is threatened when we let the dehumanization of any human being go unchallenged. This is no time for a casual faith or a casual commitment to the values that matter most to you. This is also no time to be alone. Right now, we need nurturing communities that remind us of our connections and responsibilities to one another as a human family. As Unitarian Universalists, we are learning how we better support one another, protect each other and our neighbors, inspire and remind each other of the power of community, practice joy and love, and teach these to our children and the next generations. Unitarian Universalism is at a crucial moment in its history. Like all institutions, we have not always been aware, or shall we say, willing, to grapple with the systems of privilege and oppression in which we are embedded and in which we participate. But that is changing. In ways large and small, throughout our denomination, our faith communities are examining our history, our theology, our commitments, and our practices, looking for the ways in which we perpetuate systems of oppression and seeking to disrupt those systems and attitudes that bar our path toward beloved community. We are called to put our values, our relationships, and all our spiritual resources to the work of wholeness. Together, imperfectly, we work to build communities and practices of inclusion, care, growth, and love. I personally hope in the words you hear today you find wisdom and guidance in your own search for truth and meaning. Whoever you are, wherever you are going, you know that you are welcome here. Now it's time for the call to worship. These words are by Sharon, Wylie. It's from our worship web, and I really like this one. It is said that ministers are here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I say we are all afflicted and we are all comfortable. May our time together this morning be a comfort and a confrontation. May we here find peace in times of tumult. May we here invite tumult into the lives of peace. May we here find calm in times of restlessness. May we here allow restlessness to evolve into action. Let this be the place you consider what you've never considered. Let this be the place you imagine for yourself something new and unthinkable. May this hour bring dreams of new ways of being in the world. Come, let us worship together. Our chalice this morning is going to be lit by Mark, and he's going to make a reading by Frances Koziar, and she's also from the UU Worship Web.
May we light this chalice this morning to remind us of the power and beauty of balance and contrast. It is darkness that can make the flame of a single candle so powerful, and light that deepens those shadows in turn. A chalice flame is the meeting point, the union of the refuge, safety, and incredible beauty of darkness, and the warmth, the assurance, and the joy of light. May this act of lighting our chalice this morning remind us that we are stronger together in all the complexities and the disagreements of relationship, because we are different and because we are one.
Now it's time for our congregational covenant. Each week, we make a promise to one another about how we choose to be in community and in the world. Please join me in saying, love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another.
So, happy 250th anniversary for our nation. To be honest, I don't feel much like celebrating. How about y'all? Do y'all feel like celebrating? Yeah, I think it's a very mixed blessing, and then that's often been the case in periods where we're celebrating these hallmarks, these anniversaries. We look back, we look at our present, and it's mixed. We have mixed emotions. So this morning, I'd like to invite us to take an overview of our history, focus on the promises we made as a country, the times we have lived up to them, and the times we haven't, and think about those ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, the boomerangs that occur in our history. And so I'm going to start at the beginning with our Constitution, the preamble to our Constitution, which says that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. So we start, when we have this overview of history, with day one, the Declaration of Independence. Last year, I went to the Dallas Museum of Arts and Letters Live, a series I highly recommend, to hear Walter Isaacson talk about his book, and he writes this short book, which I highly recommend, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written, where he writes, "We see in the editing of the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence our founders balancing the role of divine providence and that of reason in determining our rights became the greatest sentence ever written, crafted by human hand. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." It's worth pausing, of course, that they didn't mean that. They didn't really mean all men. They didn't mean women at all, and they certainly didn't mean the enslaved people that were living there at the time, including the 600 enslaved people that Thomas Jefferson purported to own during his lifetime. Let's pause also to reflect over the fact that when he originally wrote the Declaration of Independence, it said this about the King of England: "He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating, carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere to incur miserable death in their transportation. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian King of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold." Well, they edited that out of the Declaration of Independence. And so in our very beginning, we have this tension between this promise we make about who we say we are, who we promise we're going to do, and the reality of it. And this, of course, is carried forward into our Constitution with the infamous 3/5 of a person clause, where enslaved human beings were determined to be 3/5 of a person for the purposes of establishing power in the southern slave states. It's also in our electoral college, which was designed in order to give and retain power to the slave states of the South. So these tensions, these failures to live up to the promise are at the very beginning and go throughout our entire history. Now, this contradiction existed really without interruption until the time of the American Civil War. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to call our attention to the words of one of the greatest American activists and orators, Frederick Douglass. And he wrote this on a speech he delivered on the 5th of July in the 1850s. And when he did this, Black Americans tended not to celebrate the 4th of July. They got together and celebrated on the 5th of July, like we are today, to celebrate the day that slavery ended in the state of New York. And he says this, and these words ring so true today: "Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the founders of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, great enough to give frame to a great age. It's not often happened to a nation to raise at one time such a number of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not certainly the most favorable, and yet I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended with, I will unite with you to honor their memory." And then he goes on to say, "But what to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving with all religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than the people of the United States. How's that for a patriotic message? And so, I don't know, I relate to that because at the same time that I celebrate the promises that we make as a nation, the things, the liberties that I value so much as an individual, as an American, I at the same time would hesitate to put an American, in fact, I avoid American flags at the moment. I don't feel like celebrating this country. Why? Well, we all know the answers to that. The cruel treatment of immigrants, the cruel treatment of immigrants. Like I did immigration work at the Human Rights Initiative for 11 and a half years, and before that another 10 or 15 years representing asylum seekers. And I always said the same thing. I've done this work since the War of 1812, and it's always been hard. It's always been hard. We've never had a just immigration system, but now it is cruel. We've been sending people who did nothing wrong to concentration camps in Central America. We are killing people who are standing up for the rights of immigrants on the streets of our American cities. This is cruelty. At the same time, we have attacks on education, censorship in universities. We have the attacks on our libraries, what books can be talked about, what books can be checked out of school libraries, courses on diversity, professors that talk about the true history about gender. These things are prohibited in our Texas universities today. The diminution of women's rights, the fact that women are dying because of the draconian laws that we have in the state of Texas. This unnecessary war. On and on and on we could go about these things right now that break our hearts. They break my heart. And so it is important to pause and mourn that and feel the sadness that we feel because of these broken promises that we have as a nation. But at the same time, look at the times where we did fight back against this, the times that we did live up to those promises. And that starts with the American Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, Walter Isaacson, in his book, he talks about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And he says, Abraham Lincoln opened his address by referring directly to the second sentence and the Declaration of Independence. 77 years ago, our fathers broke forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And Isaacson pointed out, so this was at the cost of 620,000 American lives, 7,058 of whom were buried there at the cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And so at the end of the Civil War, we have an opportunity to start anew. It is, in fact, a second American Revolution. In this great book, The Rise and Fall of the Second American Republic, Arthur Senda writes this: there can be no doubt that the destruction of racial slavery and the reconstruction of the misbegotten Southern Confederacy fundamentally remade the entire republic. That revolution transformed the U.S. Constitution. Long before historians did, the abolitionist William Goodell proclaimed in 1861 that the Civil War was the second American Revolution that portended the national abolition of all inequalities. And the abolitionist feminist, Angela Grimke-Weld, in her 1863 address of the Women's National Loyal League to the soldiers of our Second American Revolution, argued that the Southern slavocracy threatened the freedom of all American citizens. And so this is a truly revolutionary moment. Jill Lepore, a historian I really admire, she writes this in her book, Stony the Road. The process of Reconstruction involved nothing less than the monumental effort to create a biracial democracy out of the wreckage of the rebellion. I pause over that. An effort to create a biracial democracy out of the wreckage of the Civil War. And though that effort ultimately was thwarted, Reconstruction saw the passage of a vast array of legislation aimed at transforming the status of the formerly enslaved, beginning with Congress's passing of the first Civil Rights Act of 1866, the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments in 1868, 1865, and 1870, and permanently altered the status of African Americans under the Constitution. Not only that, this is something, I went to school in the state of Alabama, sadly. So this is history I did not learn. And I suspect most of you did not learn this history as well. In fact, I suspect most people today do not know this history. But during Reconstruction, for the first time in American history, African Americans were elected to the U.S. Congress with victories in 1870 of Senator Hiram Revels from Mississippi, Congressman Joseph Rainey from South Carolina in 1869. P.B.S. Pinchback, who served in the Louisiana Constitutional Convention, was elected to the state senate, became lieutenant governor, and briefly served as the first black governor of any state in the state of Louisiana. William Lloyd Garrison marveled at the transformation that was occurring in our nation. He said, "Colored men, jurors, sheriffs, magistrates, postmasters, filling, in a word, numerous offices of trust, emolument under the United States and various state governments. Generally, black office holders had already been leaders of their local communities as preachers, Union soldiers, skilled artisans, while others were Northern and freeborn. An overwhelming majority were literate. A few had attended colleges in the North, such as Oberlin College, a hotbed of abolition. When I went, my wife and I did a civil rights tour through the South. We went back and toured these places that I had barely heard about as a child growing up in the South. We went and walked the Selma Bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We went to the museums in Montgomery, and we went to the capital of the state of Alabama. It was very, very interesting. As you walked in, there was a gentleman standing there by the front door, and he said, "Do you know about this staircase here?" And I went, "No." And he said this was designed by a self-taught engineer who was an enslaved man, and he designed this. He had built bridges, and it was a marvel of architecture. This unsupported circular wood oak staircase. And I said, "That was amazing." He said, "Yeah, but go inside the chamber." And I went in there, and that man's name was listed as a sitting member of the Alabama state legislature in the 1870s. And so these are things that happened. We had such an opportunity as a country to live up to those promises we made at the beginning. And in fact, we did live up to it. We were on the cusp of a biracial republic, living up to what we said we did. But we all know what happened next. It's what we call the redemption. It's not what we call redemption. It's what they called at the time the redemption, which was the turning back away from these civil rights and establishing by terror and by the change in laws in the various southern states in particular, making it more and more difficult for African Americans, for black people to vote, and for African Americans to win office. And so we saw all of that reversed, all of it reversed. And that is the status quo that that was maintained until the civil rights era in the 1960s. So from the end of Reconstruction in about 1879 through 1965 with what? 1965, the Voting Rights Act that changed things. Again, there was very, very, very little representation of black people in the South. And what else happened? They turned their backs on public education. They turned their backs on things that would have benefited all citizens because of this radical, sometimes people have called this moment we're in now as conservative. These things are not conservative. These are radical moves to maintain white supremacy in our country. And that was the status quo until 1965 when a Texan, Lyndon Baines Johnson, signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And what happened as a result of the Voting Rights Act, which, by the way, people paid for with their lives. John Lewis got beaten by state troopers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. The whole country watched the news of the Alabama state troopers weighing into these people that were fighting for civil rights and fighting for voting rights. People paid with blood to establish those voting rights, and it worked. The Voting Rights Act had an immediate impact. By the end of 1965, 250,000 new black voters had been registered, 1/3 by federal examiners. By the end of 1966, only 4 out of the 13 southern states had fewer than 50% of African Americans registered to vote. The Voting Rights Act was then readopted and strengthened in 1970, 1975, and 1982. What a thing. And I guess that's the status quo, right? Yeah. You guys are well informed. We know this is not the status quo because people saw voting rights worked for America. It worked. We were better off because all people were being represented by one person, one vote. And so we had Barbara Jordan getting elected to the United States Congress from Houston. We had this replicated all over the United States. And could rich white nationalists accept that? No, they fought back. They fought back hard. And so the Voting Rights Act was attacked in Shelby County versus Holder, the United States Supreme Court, which held these relevant provisions of the Voting Rights Act, this pre-clearance, which required the southern states who had established all the black codes and the other laws to restrict black voting, they had to get any change pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. When Justice Roberts was in his confirmation process, he had written exclusively about his desire to change the rights of voting rights in this country. John Lewis went to the mat fighting against Roberts' confirmation because he knew what was going to happen, and in fact it happened. Shelby County did away, found it to be discriminatory, bizarrely, that this pre-clearance provisions of the Voting Rights Act, and we see the consequences living out through today. And that had its kind of fatal blow in recently with Louisiana versus Calais, where these voting maps in Louisiana were finally had created 2 majority black districts in the state of Louisiana, doing away with those maps, and instantly all over the South, the legislators started redrawing their lines that night. Why? Why would they do that? That power, exactly, power. They want to maintain, and I am here to stand together with all of you that this is not what we want as a country. This is not, I'm used to say this is not who we are. People would say this is not who we are. It is who we are. We can't deny that. This is who we are, but it's not who we say we are. It's not, we send people to talk about voting rights. We celebrate voting. But if your vote doesn't count and you cannot elect people that look like you and represent you and come from your community. We are not a true republic. And so I think that's a bad thing. So I'm going to, believe it or not, I'm going to try to end this with a positive note. Because, again, this is a tension. This is dark. It's bleak. They look like they're winning. And that's why I love that quote from Dr. King. This same this same dynamic was at work in 1956. This is a wonderful time, but people think we're going backwards. And people think that now. My wife and I, we talk about these things incessantly. And we say, doesn't it seem like we're going backwards? And it does. It does feel like we're turning our back on voting rights that were established at the cost of blood by activists in this country. So I love this book. I saw this, heard this, Rebecca Solnit. She was interviewed in The New Yorker, I think, and she was talking about this book, The Beginning Comes After the End. Her words are what I want to leave us with today as a reflection going forward. One thing I've learned through the back and forth over the years is that you can take rights away, but you can't so easily take ideas away, including people's belief in their own rights and the rights of people they care about. You can cut down flowers, but you can't stop the spring. There is no going back, though how we go forward is at hand. She quotes a man named Girandoradas, and he said, Girandoradas and I both believe that contemporary right-wing authoritarianism is waging a war against the future, against the world being created and in many ways already well established. Through what were once radical ideas of universal human rights, equality across race and gender, ideas about our inseparability from nature that never died in the marches but were died in the centers of power. I have always drawn, this is a very interesting statement, I have always drawn my hope from the past, not the future, from the way the past shows us how change works, how what once seemed impossible becomes actuality, and how it models the ways that power works in contradiction to what the officially powerful people tell us. We can and we must change things, and that is up to us. Thank you.